All right. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's guest session, we've got Saneia Norton, who I will introduce shortly. Before we get going, as always, I'm hosting from Canberra tonight. And in Canberra, I'd like to acknowledge that the traditional owners are the Ngunnawal people. Pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing contribution to our wonderful culture and connection to landscape and water here in Canberra. So welcome, Saneia. So for those of you who you've probably heard in Saneia in some form or sense, most may know her from the Dig Beneath Design podcast. But Saneia also runs Saneia Norton Design Communication, and I've just found out also works part-time as a landscape architect still at Tyrrell Studio in Manly. So Saneia, you are a landscape architect, but more recently your career has focused on communications and that coaching side of things. Can you take us through how your career really evolved into that pathway?
Yeah. Before I start, I'd too like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I live and work, and that's the Guy Mariagal, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And welcome everybody here tonight and people viewing this. As you said, Sarah, so started off as a landscape architect. Straight from uni, I went to the government architect's office and basically stayed there for about 17, 18 years, really long time. And it was a great place for a recent grad. So a government architect's office worked on public projects from master plans down to buildings and, smaller things. But there were schools, there were hospitals, there were parks, there were streets, there were town centres. It was all public and really interesting all across the state of New South Wales. And it was multidisciplinary. So I was all the time thrown into teams with engineers, with architects, dealing with project managers, and often having quite a bit of responsibility from a young age, which was amazing because you'd see a project through from concept through to construction, and then often you'd be out on site making your case with the contractor, and you'd learn a lot really quickly about what to do and what not to do next time. So I spent a long time there, and then about mid-career, I just had a few kind of speed bumps, if you like. Life events happen where I got sick and I had to take a year off work. I got the chance to take long service leave, and I basically had a moment where I reconsidered everything. Up until that point, I'd been working really hard, leading projects by that stage, documenting big public projects and being the person running the documentation. And after my breaks, my career breaks, found it quite stressful. And I just started thinking, is this the only way that I can practice? What do I still love about my job? Am I in the right industry for one thing? What are my strengths? And my strengths were always communication and people. And I realized I had a whole lot of observations about the industry, mainly about how I felt there was a bit of a communication gap, where we'd been taught how to communicate visually, like a lot of time at uni, a lot of time at work. We'd spend most of our time putting the presentations together and doing the drawings, and not as much on how we wrote and spoke about our work. So that I saw it was a bit of a niche. And I thought that with my skills and my experience, I could start to offer some training in that area, the kind of training that I wish I'd had back in the profession. And that's what I've been doing for the past 4 years, and just trying it. It was kind of a thing where I think there's this gap. I think people might need this training, and then just putting it out in the industry and testing it. And 4 years later, hundreds of people have done my coaching, and it's still going really well. So I'm doing a job that I really enjoy. So I kind of feel a bit glad that I had those breaks mid-career, that I could just take a step back and go, what do I really want to do? What do I want to do for the next 20 years of my career?
Definitely speaking my language in terms of seeing a gap and trying to serve it.
Yeah.
And Saneia, I wonder from your experience, I mean, you're seeing something that is almost, it's a negative, it's turning you off the industry perhaps. And for some people, I think when they see things like that, maybe it pushes them away. But I guess what you've done, and I guess I can relate to it, it's what I've done as well, is instead of allowing that to push you away or frustrate you or disillusion you, you turn around and decide to do something in that space to create the change. What gave you the confidence or belief that you had the skills to do that, and that it was a right thing for you? How did you fight the imposter syndrome in taking that on?
That's such a great question, because I had all those doubts. At the beginning, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to need like at least 2 more degrees before anyone will take me seriously. I might need to do a journalism degree or linguistics or something, you know. I think where I got the confidence was through people around me that believed in me. So, and that's even as close as someone like my husband, who is a graphic designer, has had his own business for a number of years. And he just said, just start, like put a pilot together, put a trial product together. And all you've got to do is get one client. And I got that one client through a friend from uni who now runs a big landscape company in Sydney. And that was it. Once I'd had the chance to prove myself and prove that it was a good product, and somebody who was somebody said, yes, this is good, then that started the ball rolling. Gave me a lot of confidence.
I think that's great advice for our students and graduates who might have ideas, but are sort of asking themselves, well, who am I to solve this? Someone else is probably doing it. But as long as there's a need and you can step into that space and provide a solution for someone and it goes well, why not? Why not give it a try? And we're so glad that you did.
Oh, thank you. That's nice. There was something else I wanted to add to that, which was there was a practical aspect to it as well, in which I already had a bit of capital. So, and that makes all the difference. So if you already have either a partner that's willing to support you for a while, they've got a steady income for you to try this new thing. Or when I left the government architect's office, I was made redundant, so I got a payout. So it's just those kind of things that also put you in the position to be able to try something new.
Yeah, sure. That's a really nice one to acknowledge. And I also wanted to quickly ask the Government Architect Office. I don't know that we have a equivalent in the ACT. I mean, we do have a government architect, but it's just a individual in the ACT. I think only contracted for a couple of days. But it sounds like it's a kind of a decent office in New South Wales.
Yeah, so for many years, and including when I started, it was a big organisation. It had about 200 people made up of architects, engineers, urban designers, project managers. And during the time that I was there towards the end, I can't remember when, it might have been around 2015, 2016, it totally changed its structure. And a lot of people were let go, and it was made into a strategic office, much, much smaller, only say 6 people to start. Right. And since then, it's been building up again from that number. Now it's probably around 20, I think, 20 or 30. And they are completely strategic.
Okay.
So they're much more aligned with planning, and they're giving advice at that front end of projects. Whereas when it was much bigger, we were the doers. We were actually building those projects and designing them.
Yeah, okay. That's useful for members to know if they're sort of looking for other job seeking avenues. I know we have a big a lot of people end up in more the planning side of things in Canberra, so that's good for context. Before we go on, we're going to talk more about communication and tips, but this quarter has been about consultants, and we've also got you on tonight in your capacity as a landscape architect. In my experience, landscape architects are sadly sometimes often thought of as glorified gardeners. and they're often tacked on at the end of the consultant list. Architects think they've got it hard, but landscape architects usually have it harder in terms of how much budget gets allocated or how
Yes.
seriously they're taken.
Yes.
For our members with no experience working with landscape architects, could you summarise a snapshot of what a landscape architect does and the services they offer?
Sure. So as an architect, you can think of a landscape architect as somebody that has similar design training to you. So we learn design theory and principles. We probably have some of the same design heroes as you do. We can discuss it and critique it like you do. But we also have, our focus is on basically everything outside of the building. So your job is to design a building. Ours is to design everything outside of it. And that could be as big as a precinct or as small as a garden. And we're trained to look at things in terms of systems. So everything's connected. We look at relationships between things. And we learn a little bit about botany, a little bit about biology, about ecology, about drainage, about geography. And we learn how to mesh those systems into something seamless. That's what we're always trying to do. That's our goal. And then you tie into that experience, how people experience a space. And of course, as architects, you're thinking about that all the time, but it's related to your building or your buildings. And as landscape architects, we're thinking about people out in the world approaching this building or being in the spaces outside this building or these buildings. And what experience do they have? What are they looking at? What are they walking on? So we're aligned professions, but we differ in those major ways. And another major way we differ is time. Yep. So our materials that we work with, they're not all natural materials. Some are concrete and constructed and hardscapes, but others are natural, like trees and plants. And so a project for us may look its best in 20 years, if you can believe that. Whereas an architectural project might look its best the day after it's completed and opened. So we're more patient, maybe. We're tied into systems and integrated ways of looking at things, but it's all through a design lens.
Yeah, I know when I'm working with our landscape designer, which is just in a single residential sense, I'm always in awe listening to her talk about the project because I feel like it's almost like positive and negative space. The architect's doing the positive space, the thing, the item, and then she has this vision for the negative space around it. And she explained to me one day how she imagines it as sort of masses and and sizing of how everything will end up being.
Yes.
But all we see is how it starts. And I do have a real fascination with landscape design and how time is so different for a landscape architect's work compared to how architecture is.
Yeah.
So when our young emerging architects are working with a landscape designer, what kind of technical documentation does a landscape architect produce?
We produce lots and lots of drawings because our sheet sets need to cover a bigger site. They need to cover the whole site. So we do drawings, sheets that might be to do with grading and levels. So we do, modeling and plans to make sure we know how accessible the site is and where water is flowing on the site and how it's being collected. So it ties into engineering, civil engineering works. We might document things as basic as pit lids. So, I did a schedule once of about 300 pits on a big public project, listed each one, listed the pit cover that it needed to have, how high or how low it needed to be in the finished scheme. We do set out of elements, we do finishes, we do sections through the site, and we detail hard works and soft works. So we might be detailing walls and seats and steps and ramps and paving, sometimes some structures, as well as all the soft works, which means detailing how much how deep a hole should be for a tree, what should go in that hole, what types of soil, what kind of mulch, how it's going to be irrigated, how the whole thing is going to be lit. It's all of those types of things. It's a number of elements that are very related to both the architectural works and the engineering works. And our goal is to make it all as seamless as possible, to not end up with trip hazards or weird connections or ugly details, when the whole experience of being in this project or on this site should be, should just be smooth and easy.
In terms of the documentation, are there any certain parts that you find architects and designers often misunderstand, or the bits that they find trickier to read?
Trickier to read, do you mean in the documentation set?
Yeah, and in terms of things that might be quite different to what we're used to documenting?
Yeah, potentially planting plans. I think the hard work stuff you'd probably understand. You definitely understand. It's all the same types of materials and relationships. Probably planting plans and maybe some of the specifications in terms of soil and those types of things.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for understanding planting plants more easily?
I think I think this with any consultant actually. If you don't understand their drawings, get them to walk you through them. Just say, what is this? What does that mean? What's it going to look like? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, that's actually really good advice. I know the younger I've been in my career, I've always been really intimidated by consultant drawings, and I've thought that I'm meant to understand them, but not at all. The more experience I get, I know to sit down and ask and point and say, so is this what it looks like in another direction? And the consultant's always really happy to help with that.
That's a really great bit of advice too. A lot of different disciplines have their own codes and legends and ways of showing things on drawings that aren't the same across all of them. So it's really worthwhile just saying, what does this box that you've drawn here mean? What's that going to mean on the ground in real life?
Yeah. And taking time to understand those legends too. I mentioned before we started chatting that engineering drawings have always terrified me, but every time I sit down and sit there with my highlighter and go, okay, that code means that thing, and by the time I've worked through it methodically, it usually all makes more sense. When should a landscape consultant be engaged in a project, and how do you think architects can be better collaborators with landscape consultants?
It's always great to be engaged early on, as early as possible. It's wonderful to have the chance to either be part of the briefing session where you really get an idea of the goals or the vision of the project, and you can even be part of that joint solution. So it's always the best when whoever's running the project is really clear about what that project needs to be, and then listens to your input. It's quite a simple thing, but architects that listen to landscape architects are the best ones. They're rarer than you would think.
Right.
And in terms of the things that can go wrong, if landscape architects aren't engaged early in the process, it's often things that are to do with levels and siting. So I've had the experience on projects before where it's way down the track and the building is sitting out of the ground at a really weird level, which means it needs to have a whole lot of ramps, or it needs to have a whole lot of drainage or something. Whereas if we'd been involved earlier in that project, we could have suggested different solutions to avoid that outcome. So that's just an example of, being brought in late just to do some, we used to call it parsley around the pig. So just to do some greening around, the thing. So early on. The other issue about collaborating with landscape architects is it's about control. So as the person running the project and, doing the design, think about how much control you want and need over the final outcome, especially outside the building. So that's another really common thing that happens, where we're engaged and an architect will tell us, this is what I want you to draw. I've already designed the external works. Can you just draw it up for us? And it's a bit disrespectful. It's, you know, if you want someone to do that, you could get a drafts person to do that. So it's about respecting somebody else's expertise and knowing really when they can help. For us, it's often earlier in the piece, and listening to their expertise, respecting their expertise.
Yeah, a lot of those things that landscape architects are working on are those really core concepts that are sort of nutted out very early on in the sort of structural planning of the site, as you say. So yeah, definitely makes sense to have your landscape architect on very early. Let's shift our discussion more to the communication side of things. And I want to start with just a very broad question. Why do architects need help communicating? And what are the, I'll just leave it there to start with, maybe. So perhaps thinking more about the podcast here, which I feel like your primary audience is architects as much as landscape architects. Why do we need help communicating?
We need help because we prioritize visual communication and often leave the verbal till the last minute. So I think our visuals are amazing and getting better and better. I think we're incredible at that. When we're not near our visuals, when we're just face to face with someone, with a client, it might be with a friend or a family member at home, how many of us can actually explain why what we do is really important, or even what we did at work that day? So I think it's just about being able to talk about your work like a normal human being, and being able to get across why it's important, why it's really valuable, why people need architecture and design, and being able to say that in a way that other people understand, people that haven't had the same training. So that's why. And I think we're encouraged at university to talk and speak in a certain way. And that's often really convoluted. It's often got a lot of jargon in it that might be technical, or it might be philosophical, theoretical. And we think that's what an architect sounds like. And that's what you need to sound like when you now go into the profession and start talking to clients. And the problem with that is, if your audience doesn't understand you, or they stumble on a word that you've said and they kind of go, oh, well, what's that mean? Oh no, now I've sort of lost track and I can't keep up with what my architect's saying. They feel stupid. They even feel excluded. Oh, you know, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to look stupid in front of everybody else. I won't ask them, wait, what does that mean again? What's that word? And it's a real problem when that person is your client. Your client will likely not have architectural expertise. They've got expertise in something else. So I think it's our job to start to be really aware of who we're talking to, and put a bit more effort into how we talk about our work, and share our love and our passion for our work in much more engaging and direct ways.
Gosh, that's so true, isn't it? I'm sure everyone can relate as heavily as me. And I'm sure landscape architect courses at university are fairly similar to architecture. I don't remember any focus on communication and verbal presentation, but there was such a heavy focus on that visual. And you're right, it's just a huge gap or lack of experience that we have. So I guess there's a few things I want to ask there. I might ask first, how can people that then have this realization that they're lacking these skills, how can you seek to improve them yourself after you've left university? Or perhaps reverse your archi jargon, untrain yourself.
Untrain yourself. Yeah, there's a couple of things you can do. Before I talk about that, you just mentioned the experience at university of presenting. And that was another reason why I wanted to step in and offer support to all of us, because that experience of standing up and presenting your work is often really hard. And I know so many people in the profession that still have scars from their design reviews and juries back in the day. It could be like 20 years ago, and they're still, still a bit mad and upset about it. But it's that sink or swim mentality that if you're naturally good at it, then great, you've got it made. If you struggle, and, newsflash, 90% of the population struggle with public speaking, just full stop. That's a really, really scary thing for a lot of people. If you struggle or have a really bad experience, you're likely to not put your hand up for those types of opportunities in the future. So when you go into the profession, people that were good at it at uni are probably going to be good at it in their jobs, and people that didn't have a great experience or are more introverted or shy will probably just stay a technical expert, or maybe in the background, or maybe feel shy speaking up in meetings, may not get ahead as quickly. It's all of those things that I think impact your career moving forward. Which is why, so I offer coaching and workshops and things like that get people to practice and get people to start to think about how they talk about their work. And most importantly, think about their own style. So you mentioned, before we started rolling, Sarah, you mentioned a couple of communicators you admired, Jacinda Ardern and Barack Obama. I do too. We can look at people like that. Sometimes they're our heroes. Sometimes they're people who might be the director of the firm where we're working. We can look at them and just think, wow, they're just a natural, and I could never be like that. And my advice to everybody is that you don't have to. It's great to have those heroes and admire certain things about other people's communication, but it's more important to work out how you're most comfortable speaking, whether you're really direct, whether you're exuberant and outgoing, whether you're thoughtful and considered and quieter, whether you're technical, whether you're really direct, whether you're conceptual. It's finding out all those types of things and then working out how you can build on those strengths, and that develops your own style of communication. That makes me really happy to see in workshops when people start finding that and trusting it.
Do you find that people have a different idea of what they think they are as a communicator compared to what they are? Because I was sort of mentioning earlier that I sometimes feel very rushed or too sort of all over the place in meetings, and that there's a lot of energy. But then I've had a couple of clients actually say that they find me quite sort of very reassuring in meetings, and sort of a calm reassurance, and that's really thrown me, actually. So are there any tips for I guess better understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are as a communicator?
Yes, so the whole thing is practice and feedback from someone you trust. So it's not necessarily feedback from anyone. So number one is practice. So number one is getting the opportunity to do it. And that's actually the scary part. So it's really hard to put your hand up and just say, when the office says, okay, who wants to give a presentation at next week's morning tea, or who wants to do this thing? It's really hard to put yourself forward for it, because it's not easy a lot of the time. But if you can find opportunities to practice, ideally starting in a low stakes environment, and something like that might be, if you go to meetings often with a more senior person and they're normally the person doing the talking, presenting to the client, you might have done more of the work. That's often the case. You can ask them or say to them before the meeting, would it be okay if I presented this part to the client? It might just be a small bit. It might be a small aspect of the project you've been working on. It might be a couple of minutes. And that could be a really great place to start. It'd be unusual for a senior person to go, no, I'll do all the talking. And if they do, then, have a think about your opportunities at that workplace. But that can be a good thing, just to try and put yourself in those positions where you get a little bit of practice and get a little bit of feedback. The thing about feedback is that don't expect yourself to be fantastic straight away. Don't expect yourself to be fantastic every time. It's more about small incremental steps thinking about, all right, well, that's what I did this time. What's one thing I might change next time? What's one thing I want to focus on next time I give a presentation or talk in a meeting? And it might just be being slower. It might be taking a breath. It might be projecting my voice. There's a number of things you can do.
I really love that. Asking for to create space to consciously push yourself or work on it. And I guess also then after that meeting, you could talk to that person depending on the relationship about how it went. I know I had a graduate who was working with me, and often I would say, well done, you did really great presenting that. And she would say, oh, I felt really flustered. Was I really flustered? Or and I know that then prompted a conversation with us. If there was a few points where I thought she could do things differently or was going into more detail than she needed in certain places. But I think perhaps graduates and students also shouldn't hold themselves back from those opportunities to present to clients, because I find the less experienced the person presenting, often the better they can relate conversationally to the client, because they will explain things that perhaps are newer learning to them. And I often think, oh yeah, I always forget to explain that. Of course, they don't know that. So I think there's a lot of reasons to put yourself out there. And I really like your advice there, Saneia, of picking little sections to do that, and also thinking of one thing that you're going to focus on improving that meeting. Are there any other particular tips or actionables you have for being a more effective design communicator?
Yeah, there are resources and things out there. Things like, you might have heard of Toastmasters, or there's courses you can do at acting
Sorry, you
schools
just
to
jumped a little bit at
oh,
the name of that place, the Masters. What was it?
Toastmasters.
Toastmasters. Okay,
Yeah,
I
have you
haven't
heard
heard
of
of that.
Toastmasters? So
No.
Toastmasters is a public speaking institution. It's been around for like many years, and anyone can join. It's a small fee, and people get together once a week and they all give short speeches. That's it.
Oh,
And
really?
they time you so that you get used to speaking to a time limit. It's quite structured, and they also count the number of ums and ahs that you say. So it's quite confronting, but
Wow.
it kind of trains you out of saying and ah. It it's quite intense. So if somebody was just really shy and wanted a really structured way to get used to public speaking, to desensitize yourself to it, that would be a really good thing to do.
Great.
And then acting schools often have courses and things you can do. They're generally a bit more expensive, but you can do things like, oh, it's quite fun, like learn about how to breathe and how to use your voice and your mouth and your jaw muscles, and how to stand, and it's quite cool. But again, if you're shy in your body, or if you feel like you're really quiet and you just need something to bust out, they can be really good too. But the rest is
Yeah,
just practice.
awesome. That sounds
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it's really fun. But the rest is just practice. And I mentioned feedback from someone you trust. That's really important, because it's quite personal. So there's all this stuff about body language and what my face does when I speak and what my voice sounds like. And it's really personal, and it's often physical. Even how nerves affect you is really personal. You might know you get a shaky leg, or your voice might get croaky like mine does, or your face might go red, or whatever it is. You experience all of those things when you're doing this as well, presenting and speaking in meetings. And it's just about having somebody acknowledge that it's not easy for everybody, and that you're on this process of building confidence. So they're not going to be too harsh with you. They're going to support you. That's what you want. You want somebody that's going to support that journey,
Yeah.
that growth.
So we've been talking about consultants this quarter, as I mentioned, and I guess that just fits in with a more general theme of collaboration. What do you think makes or breaks designers' relationships with their consultants, and ultimately makes or breaks the success of the project?
Okay, well, no surprises for number one, which is communication. So this absolutely makes or breaks, and I've seen it over and over again. And it could be just personalities on a project team where there's a power play happening. You know, I've seen architects kind of like dominate over engineers, just saying, you know, John, I don't want to see any of your ugly pits in the middle of my paving. And, you know, the engineer going, oh, all right, you know, I'm not going to do a good job for you then. So there's all this kind of stuff that actually seems so unprofessional, but actually happens and ends up impacting the project in the long run. So I've also seen project managers who try and keep designers under the thumb, and they think you've really got to rein architects in so they don't blow the budget. They don't respect necessarily what we do. There's all kinds of things that can happen. So communication, first of all, clear communication is really important. And then in terms of consultant coordination, just say through a documentation project, constant clear communication is the thing. And that is quite exhausting. So it takes a lot of energy. You've got to do the work. And then at the same time, you've got to make sure that you're talking to the client, you're getting changes, you're making sure they're happy, and then you're feeding that information to the consultant team. And when a client changes something, that's got to go out to the team as well. Or when there's something discovered through one of your consultants' analysis or work, that's got to feed back up to the client. So it actually takes up heaps of your time, more time than you would think when you're designing and documenting a project. So communication. Second one that makes or breaks a collaboration. You said relationship. It's kind of like a relationship.
It is.
It is. It's shared values. And that means great collaborations are generally with people that care about the same things as you. And that might be a shared sense of aesthetics, somebody that loves the same look, the same design heroes, the same materials even. People that value the same process, and maybe that involves communication, or maybe that's a design process and somebody shares that and has the same. That's going to be a really great and easy collaboration. It might be environmental values. It might be a commitment to sustainability. If you work with consultants that don't share that, then that's hard. It's hard to educate other people. It's hard to make people change their values. So it's much easier if you can, if you have the opportunity to go looking for collaborators that share values with you.
Yeah.
And the final thing, were you going to say something?
You go. No,
okay.
Keep going.
All right. And the final thing is it's respect. So that just means, I mentioned it at the beginning. So good collaboration means knowing what you know, what your training is, and trusting that, having confidence in that. And then knowing that others have had really detailed training in other areas and they're experts in that area, and to listen to them. That's it. Respect their training, respect their advice. Doesn't mean you always have to take it, but it means you need to consider it and have a justification for why you might want to do something differently.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're my three.
I think often when we talk about being a good communicator, we're focusing on whether we're saying the right things and how we're delivering it. But a lot of it just comes back to actually being a really good listener, doesn't it?
Such an underrated skill. But yes.
Yeah, definitely something I'm working on.
Me too.
Those are fantastic tips. Thanks, Saneia. I feel like all our members are going to be expert collaborators now. I wanted to ask us sort of a quite nitty-gritty question. What are your thoughts on communicating over email versus phone calls in a consultant collaboration?
It's a good one. Okay. I had a friend who had a really great rule about emails and phone calls. And it was something like, if it's longer than a 3-line email, pick up the phone. So if it's sometimes email's good for documenting a conversation, and maybe that would
Yeah.
work really well as a follow-up after a phone call.
Yeah.
Email can seem easier because I don't know, I certainly would revert to email when I was dealing with a lot of my consultants back at Government Architects, because it was easier than face-to-face. It's easier for delivering bad news. It's just less, it feels less confrontational. But with hindsight, I think picking up the phone would have gotten me answers and direction sooner. So that's really
Yeah.
going to benefit the project. If you get an answer to your question, if you get a response, if you have that discussion that lets you move the design forward sooner, then that's often to the benefit of the project. So
Yeah,
I
I
think it's a tough
absolutely
one.
agree. And I'm trying, I mean, I'm constantly trying to push myself to do this more as well, because it's just really tempting to write that email. You can think about how you're going to say it and you can say it perfectly. And as you say, you've already got that record. But I am noticing it even, even, I think it's a very generational thing. I noticed that those that are more senior to me are much more comfortable picking up the phone, and I noticed those
Yeah.
more junior to me are very resistant, which is it's partly just being less confident in what you're going to say and less experienced. But I think it's also that a younger generations, you know, we text, we don't really call so much anymore,
That's it.
and I think that's something that uh, students and graduates can really work on. I think it's something you could be really noticed in your firm with a real point of difference if you're sort of really willing to make phone calls, because no one else around you will. I often encourage it in the job seeking process as well. If you can make that difference of being willing to make the phone call and then follow up afterwards is often a real positive.
Yeah.
And as you say, you just get the answers so much quicker. You're not stuck in this week-long email back and forth volley.
Yeah. I love those tips. Something that you could do, and something that I've done in the past, still do actually, is if you're nervous about a phone call, is to write down what you want to say, write down your key kind of points. So the things that you know you need to get across,
Mm-hmm.
and just have that on a bit of paper as you make the call. You might take a few deep breaths before you make the call, then you just press it and you go. This is, there's no turning back now. And then you might even afterwards just go, okay, I'm going to make this hard phone call and then I'm going to get a coffee. So you just give
Yeah.
yourself a reward afterwards. But
Yeah.
and another thing I thought of was in one of my podcast episodes, it's with Jenny Officer from WA, one of the directors at Officer Woods Architects. And she said something about phone calls, which was you could spend a day or a really long time trying to work out a door schedule or a fixture, whereas one phone call to the right supplier or to the technical expert would sort it out for you in 5 minutes. So I think that's amazing. It's just like to think of the time you could save.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. Pardon me. I'm just going to pop in with a little reminder now to those members that are watching. If you've got any questions, we're probably going to have a little bit of time at the end. Pop them in the chat and then I'll invite you in at the right time to pop your video on and ask Saneia. Saneia, as a design communication expert, what do you know now that you wish you had known starting out in your career?
I wish I'd known what my strengths were earlier on.
Okay.
I feel like it took me, I mean, you probably shouldn't ever, regret time wasted. I don't think it was wasted. It all leads you to a point, doesn't it? But I wish I'd known and learned not to compare myself to other people, and even not to accept pigeonholing by others. If you don't know what pigeonholing means, it just means that others have a perception of you. Oh, you're the quiet one. People might tell you, oh, you're the one that loves report writing, or you're the designer, and you're not really the designer. So often you might get all this feedback, especially earlier in your career, and you might be working with others in a team and see other people's strengths and not really have a clear idea of your own. It's really hard to know how you know what they are. I don't really know, but for me, it came halfway through my career. And then I realized, looking back, that the things that I loved most as part of my job, which was talking to clients, it was working on designs, it's still design based, but it was more the language and it was the interaction with people. And that was the thing that ended up forming a career for me, forming a business. So all of the information that I observed, I'm the kind of person that sits back and takes a lot in before I speak. So I realized I'd absorbed all of these anecdotes and stories and information, and now that feeds into my work. So I think it all means something. And certainly there was amazing aspects of that first part of my career, but I think it's worth keeping an eye out for early on and not letting anybody else define your strengths for you. That's it. That's what
What
I wish I'd
difference
known.
do you think it would have made for you if you had known those strengths earlier?
I think I would have sought more opportunities to hone those strengths.
Yeah.
Because that's something I really believe in. I know we all think of ourselves as being good at some things and not so good at others. And you sometimes obsess about the things you're not good at. And you might even do courses and things to get better at those things you're not that good at naturally.
Yeah.
But I kind of believe that if you build on the things you already are quite good at and have a natural talent for, you have the chance to be exceptional at that. So that's what I like to think about.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I do have a question of my own that I've thought of. I remember with thinking about this umbrella of consultants as a student, as a graduate, and then even now leading projects. I've always had this question about how you find the right consultants. And it seems that 90% of the industry are just working with the person they've worked with before or someone else that they've met through some kind of channel of convenience. So I guess if you want to be more proactive about finding great consultants to work with, how do you go about that?
Wow. I wish I knew. In terms of disciplines that are more, I don't know, in terms of disciplines that are more closely aligned with your own, say landscape architecture and architecture, I've got a lot of friends who are architects, and often it's those friends and contacts, and it might even be somebody who on a project you strike up a great working relationship with. It's those types of people, even friends that you can communicate with and you get on with, that start to build those networks. Sorry, excuse me. So that's one way. Work with people you already get on with and like and trust. And others are referrals. So often it's worth just reaching out to your network and just asking, have you worked with a great engineer recently? I need a really good lighting person. Didn't go so well the last time with the firm we chose. Yeah.
Yeah. I know I've sort of shied away from referrals in some instances because you think, oh, they're just referring them because they know them. But then I have a job recently where I thought I did a more diligent approach of reaching out to all the local engineers. It was in a regional area. Sending my sort of initial contact to them, asking for quotes, judging how they sort of responded. And it was a good process. But the consultant we ended up selecting, I really would have loved to have a working appreciation from someone that did know them. And the next, I've got another project in a similar region, and I'll certainly be asking the builder who they've worked with before and who they would recommend.
Yeah.
So it can
That's
go
a really
either
great
way,
idea.
I guess.
Can I do a little book plug? It's not my own book, but it's just something on this topic that might be of interest to everybody. Collaborations in Architecture and Engineering.
Oh, wow.
And this is a book of case studies of amazing relationships between architects and engineers. And a lot of famous firms, a lot of buildings that you will know, and the story of how that collaboration actually worked, almost technically. Sometimes the engineer will speak, sometimes the architect will speak, and those relationships, they work with each other over and over again. So once you find a good collaborator, you're kind of set. and you build and grow that relationship, and it often makes your projects incredible. Like these collaborations in this book have ended up with often groundbreaking solutions that conventional projects wouldn't have pursued. So yeah, they're out there, but I think it's elusive. I think it's up to us to just always be on the lookout for great collaborators. But again, it's just about finding and asking those questions like you do, Sarah, what their process is like, what their values are. Can you get a feeling for how they operate? Are they going to return your phone calls? Are they going to deliver stuff on time? It's kind of hard.
Yeah. And collaboration is almost another thing, isn't it? That I think university is a little bit devoid of, in that sort of egotistical education that we get, where you're meant to know it all and lead it all and have the right answers.
Yeah.
And that's very different, often in reality, on the path to a good outcome.
Yeah, well, a lot of successful architects operate exactly like that and have built a whole career operating like that. That singular vision, draw it like I want it, and that filters down through the team as well. Just tell the consultants what you want.
I don't know how they have that confidence, and maybe maybe it's partly generational or related to certain privileged groups, perhaps. But I know it feels. I feel much safer when I know that I've got a team to work with on helping me find the answer, rather than all this pressure to know all the correct answers myself. To spend a day in the minds of some of those very strong, ego-driven designers would be very fascinating, I think.
Sure would.
Just hear what they tell themselves.
Yeah.
We don't have any questions. We've clearly covered it all off, Saneia. So to finish off, we'll ask our question that we ask all of our guests. What's your number one piece of advice for emerging architects?
My advice is it's very simple, work with good people. The flip side of it, I've got another book for you, is don't work with assholes. So this is a great book called How to Do Great Work Without Being an Asshole. Excuse the language, everybody. But this is actually quite a great dissection of culture in a design industry, where there's that culture of working long hours, the work comes first, work every weekend, tyrants and dictators. It's just saying that, and I certainly believe it doesn't have to be like that. And I think that life's short so that you should work with people who you like. You should work with people who you admire and respect. Don't work for people who you suspect are or know to be misogynists or bullies or narcissists or sleazy. I just think you're too precious and life's too short for that. So find good people.
Nice advice. I'm definitely getting a copy of that book. I think I'd really enjoy that one. And I have to ask you, members are probably sick of me referencing this book. Are you familiar with Why Architects Matter by Flora Samuel?
No, I haven't read that.
It's a great book. She gave a lecture at the Archi-Team conference, must have been 2 years ago when we were still having conferences. And I will tell members about it because she's coming to join us for a session, which I'm really excited. She's an academic from the UK. And it's a book based on a whole heap of research she has done, but it's all about how architects can better evidence the work and the value that they do. And she sort of breaks down the different types of architects and talks about how we can just be so much better at talking very clearly in an evidence-based way about the value that we offer, rather than using all the jargon that we tend to get taught at university.
I need that book. That sounds amazing. What a great session that'll be.
I'm glad I could offer you something as well.
Thank you.
That was such a, I think, a very warm and candid chat, but also so many really useful tips there, Saneia, that members can start practicing straight away in a very easy way. So thank you so much for sharing all of those with us.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me, and really nice to meet you and meet everybody.
And where are the places that we can find more about you or follow you further, Saneia?
Yeah, best place is my website. So that's just sndc.com.au. And yeah, I'll be updating that soon, and I'll be putting out a second season of the podcast over the next few months. And
Any
yeah,
particularly
follow me
exciting
on there.
people coming up?
Oh no, I'm still got my dream guest list. So I'll let you know once I've hooked some big fish. I like getting some really well known people, and then some just everyday architects that are just on the tools and just doing the job that we all do. So
Yeah.
I like having a mix.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right, well, we'll wrap that up there. Thanks very much, Saneia, and thanks everyone that came along. And I hope you all have a good week, especially for the people in lockdown. Hang in there, and I'll see you again this time next week. Thanks, everyone.